For 10 years, on every anniversary of his daughter's death, Alessandro Moretti, the most powerful Mafia king in New York, came alone to the cemetery, carrying a single red rose to lay before her grave. But that morning, as he stepped beneath the old maple tree, he stopped cold. Beside the grave, a man was kneeling in tears, and a girl of about 10 was stacking small pebbles on the headstone. When the child lifted her face to look at him, Alessandro's heart seemed to stop. Those clear gray-blue eyes were exactly the eyes of the daughter he had lost, from the gentle gaze down to the small specks of light around the pupils. Alessandro did not know who she was, and even less could he understand why she called the woman beneath the stone her mother. And the truth revealed just moments after brought the most feared man on the east coast of America to tears. Alessandro Moretti closed the last 3 steps between himself and the grave, with the same measured pace he had used for 40 years, walking into rooms where men waited to be judged. The red rose was still in his left hand. His right hand hung open at his side, the way it always hung when Bruno was 20 meters behind him and a stranger was too close to Elena. "This is my daughter's grave," he said. His voice did not rise. It never rose. "Who are you?" The man kneeling on the wet grass startled and turned. 34, maybe. Brown hair too long at the collar. Flannel shirt worn thin at the elbows. The left cuff frayed to threads. Work boots with the leather split across the toe, wrapped and rewrapped in black electrical tape. He rose slowly, keeping his hands visible, the way a man raised in Brooklyn learns to keep his hands visible when the wrong car pulls up beside him on the wrong street. "My name is Owen Reed," the man said. "I'm a groundskeeper here at Greenwood." The child beside him did not startle. She did not even look afraid. She simply straightened from where she had been arranging small stones along the base of the headstone and lifted her face to Alessandro. Her purple coat was too thin for October. Her sneakers were a full size too large. 2 brown braids hung down her shoulders, tied at the ends with rubber bands, the kind that came free with the morning mail. "Mister," she said, "are you sad?" "Uncle Owen says people come here when they are sad." Alessandro could not answer. He could not make his mouth work around the shape of an answer. He turned back to the man. "Answer me. Why does the child call my daughter her mother?" Owen swallowed. His eyes went to the girl and stayed there. Protective in a way Alessandro recognized instantly, because he had worn that look once, a lifetime ago, over a crib in a room that no longer existed. "Mr. Moretti," Owen said quietly enough that the wind carried it away from Sophia. "I know who you are. Everyone in New York knows who you are. But this is not something I can explain here in 3 minutes." Something old and slow moved in Alessandro's chest. For 10 years no one had come near Elena's grave on the 14th of October. Not the other groundskeepers, not the cemetery director, not the stray tourists who wandered the Victorian paths looking for famous names. The men of Greenwood knew whose rose sat beneath the maple every year. They knew, and they stayed away. This one had not stayed away. "Give me somewhere to talk," Owen said. Sophia should not hear these things. Alessandro looked at her again. She had gone back to her stones. She placed each one with the small, exact care of a child who had learned early that the world would not give her many things, and that the few things it gave must be handled properly. Her nose turned up just at the tip. When she frowned at a stone that would not balance, her brow drew together in a single narrow line. The soft curl at the ends of her hair caught the light. Every detail was Elena. He raised one finger. 20 meters away, standing very still beside a headstone that read Whitmore, Bruno began to walk. "Sit with the child," Alessandro said when Bruno reached them. Bruno was 6'3" and 240 pounds. Sophia looked up at him without blinking, weighed him for perhaps 2 seconds, and held out a small pink pebble. "Would you like to help me stack these?" she said. "There is a way to make them balance if you are patient." Bruno, who had broken 3 men's ribs in a warehouse in Red Hook the previous summer, sat down cross-legged on the wet grass and took the pebble. Alessandro and Owen walked. 50 meters east, beneath an old ash tree, there was a stone bench weathered smooth by a century of visitors. They sat. Alessandro did not put the rose down. He held it in his lap as if it were something breakable. "Speak," he said. Owen drew a breath and let it out, and began the way a man begins when he has practiced the sentence in his head for 7 years without ever expecting to say it aloud. "Sophia is Elena's daughter. She is 10 years old. She was born 2 months before your daughter's accident. Her father was Gabriel Wood, my best friend from the age of 15. Gabriel died 7 years ago. I have raised her since. Under the guardianship Gabriel left me in his will." Alessandro's hand went out and found the arm of the bench, and gripped. "In 40 years, in every meeting room and every warehouse and every hospital corridor, No sentence had ever taken the ground out from under him the way this one just had. He had heard men beg for their lives. He had heard a doctor tell him Elena was gone. He had heard both without moving. He did not move now, but the world moved around him. He looked toward Sophia. She was laughing at something Bruno had done. The pink pebble in her hand caught the October sun and threw back a small, warm point of light against the granite. Elena had a child, he said inside himself. Only inside. His mouth did not open. Elena had a child, and her father never knew. Owen sat still on the bench beside him and did not speak, because Owen knew, the way men who have carried secrets a long time always know, that the real story had not begun yet. Start at the beginning, Alessandro said. His voice was quiet. It had gone quiet in the way voices go quiet when the man behind them has decided he will hear every word, no matter what it costs. Owen drew a long breath and let it out toward the graves. The wind moved the red leaves overhead. Somewhere near the chapel, a bell rang the hour. 11 years ago, Owen said. There was a drawing class at the community center in Brooklyn Heights, Tuesday and Thursday evenings. Elena signed up in the fall session. He glanced at Alessandro to see if he already knew this. Alessandro's face told him nothing. So he went on. She told Gabriel later she started coming to get out of the house. You were hosting dinners then, introducing her to sons of families along the coast. She wanted somewhere she could sit for 2 hours where no one looked at her the way those men looked at her. Alessandro's jaw set, but he did not speak. Gabriel was 27. He lived in Red Hook. He did hand-carved furniture out of a small shop on Van Brunt Street. He took the class because he wanted to design his own pieces instead of copying catalogs. They sat next to each other the first night. She told him her name was Elena Rossi. She used her mother's family name. Owen paused. For 3 months, Gabriel didn't know who her father was. Then one evening after class, a classmate was reading the daily news in the hallway and your picture was on the front page. Some ribbon cutting downtown. Gabriel saw the caption. He recognized the last name he had never heard her say. Alessandro closed his eyes for 1 second and opened them. He told me that night, Owen said. He said he had to end it. He said men like him don't step into worlds like that and walk out again with the girl. He was going to tell her the next class that he couldn't see her anymore. He didn't, Alessandro said. No, Owen said. She came to the shop first. She stood outside the door in the rain for 2 hours before he opened it. She said, I loved you before you knew who I was. Don't leave me because of the name on my birth certificate. Gabriel opened the door. The rose in Alessandro's lap trembled a fraction. He did not know he had moved. After that, they lived 2 lives at once, Owen said. In front of you, she was still your daughter. She went to the dinners. She smiled at the sons of the men along the coast. But at night, and on the weekends, she drove over the Brooklyn Bridge to Red Hook. She sat in that shop for hours. Gabriel would be planing wood or fitting a joint, and she would sit on the bench by the window with her sketchbook, and neither of them said much, but the light was yellow, and there was sawdust on the floor, and they were happy. Owen let his eyes go to the grave. I was 15 when Gabriel and I became friends. I was the first person he brought her to meet. The 3 of us used to sit in the shop on Friday nights with cheap beer and a frozen pizza in his toaster oven. And I want you to know something, Mr. Moretti. In that shop, in those hours, Elena laughed more than I ever saw her laugh anywhere else on any day of her life. Alessandro's chest went tight, so tight that for a moment, he could not draw breath around the pressure of it. He had never seen the girl Owen was describing. He had never in 24 years sat across a table from a version of his daughter that was simply happy. He had seen her poised. He had seen her composed. He had seen her polite. He had never seen her at ease. Gabriel proposed to her at Brooklyn Bridge Park, Owen said. It was a Sunday in June, sunset. He carried a ring in his pocket that he had made himself. A silver band with a small aquamarine stone, her favorite color. She said yes before he finished asking. They planned to tell you afterward. She was going to hire a private attorney first, not because she was afraid of the law, because she was afraid of what you might do to Gabriel. Alessandro closed his eyes and kept them closed. He did not need Owen to finish. He could finish it himself, in the dark behind his eyelids. Elena had become pregnant. Elena had chosen to keep the child. Elena had still not found the moment to tell him, and then on a wet October night 10 years ago, her car had left the coastal road, and every plan she had made had gone into the black water of the bay with her. He opened his eyes. He asked the only question he had breath left to ask. When was the child born? Owen did not look away. Sophia was born 2 months before Elena's accident. Owen looked toward the graves and lifted one hand in a small, patient gesture, Sophia glanced up, understood without needing words, and turned back to her stones. She held out the pink pebble again to the enormous man sitting cross-legged beside her. "Would you like to try this one, sir? It is my favorite." Bruno took the pebble in a hand that had one red hook summer, closed around the throat of a man twice his weight. He held it now as if it might break. He set it on the top of the small pyramid Sophia had built along the base of the headstone. It teetered. It held. "You did it," Sophia said. "You have patient hands." Bruno, who had never in his life been told he had patient anything, said nothing at all, and reached carefully for a second stone. Owen turned back to the bench. "After Elena died," he said, "Gabriel nearly lost his mind. He didn't leave the shop for 2 weeks. He didn't eat. He didn't sleep. He sat on the floor next to the crib and stared at the wall." Alessandro's fingers had gone white around the arm of the bench, but Sophia was crying to be fed. She was 2 months old, and there was no life insurance, no savings, just the shop and a small carpenter's income, and a man who loved his child more than he loved his own grief. So Gabriel got up. He learned to mix formula in the dark. He learned to change a diaper with one hand while a plane was gliding on. He started taking custom orders at night after she was asleep, so his days could belong to her. Owen paused, swallowed. He did that for 3 years. He was the best father I have ever seen a man be. Then one afternoon in the fall he was working a job downtown, an interior fit-out on Livingston Street. A 40-kilo oak plank slipped off a stack on the 3rd floor. It hit him in the temple. The site foreman called me from the ambulance. Gabriel was already gone before they reached the hospital. Alessandro's mouth moved once and made no sound. "I was his guardian of record for Sophia," Owen said. "He put it in writing the week she came home from the hospital. He also left me the medical debts, the ones from the 2 winters she spent in and out of Methodist with ear infections and pneumonia. $18,000. I have paid down 9. The rest is still there." He looked away for one breath. 7 years now. "Groundskeeper here days. When I can borrow the car, I drive rideshare at night. She sleeps on the top bunk. I sleep on the bottom. We share a closet. She has never once asked me for anything she thought I couldn't give her." Owen reached into the inside pocket of the flannel and drew out a small, yellowed envelope. The corners were frayed, soft as cloth from years of being touched. He held it a moment before he offered it. "Gabriel gave me this the week after Elena died." He said, "Owen, if Alessandro Moretti ever finds Sophia, put this in his hand. Elena wrote it to a friend she never sent it to. He has a right to know what his daughter was thinking before she died." Alessandro took the envelope. His hand shook. He had not felt his hand shake since he was 19 years old. Inside was a single page, folded 3 times. The handwriting slanted right, the loops of the L's coming down long and soft. He had not seen that handwriting in 10 years. It hit him harder than the news of the grave had. "Dear Miriam," she wrote about Gabriel, about the way he made her coffee in the mornings and sat with her on the bench by the window while she sketched, about the baby coming, about the gray-blue eyes she had dreamed the baby would have, about the fear of telling her father, and the private attorney she had already retained, and the small wooden house she wanted to build near a creek in the Hudson Valley, where she would paint and Gabriel would build, and their child would grow up far away from the dark SUVs that came up the drive at night carrying strangers. And at the bottom, "Miriam, I know my father will be angry. He may not speak to me for years, but when the baby is a little older I am going to bring her home. I am going to put her in his arms. I am going to give him the chance to be a grandfather. Everyone deserves a second chance, don't they?" The last word blurred beneath a tear that had fallen from Alessandro's face onto the paper. The most feared man on the east coast of America folded forward on the stone bench beneath the ash tree, one hand pressed to his mouth, the letter open on his knee. He wept the way old men weep when they finally understand what they have lost. Owen sat still and did not look at him, and did not speak. From 50 meters away, at the base of the headstone, Sophia laughed. Bruno had balanced a stone at an impossible angle, and Sophia was applauding him with both small hands. 3 days later, Alessandro did not use his own men. He hired an independent firm out of Midtown, 3 former federal investigators with no ties to any of the 5 families. He wanted the report clean. He wanted no one inside the estate telling him what he wanted to hear. 72 hours, a brown folder on his desk. Owen Reed, 34 years old, 7 years as groundskeeper at Greenwood Cemetery. No criminal record. No debt to any street lender or private syndicate. Legitimate medical debt inherited from Gabriel Wood, approximately $9,000, currently being paid down at $120 a month. 1-bedroom apartment in Sunset Park. A walk-up above a laundromat on 5th Avenue. Sophia slept on the top bunk. Owen slept on the bottom. They shared one narrow closet. Sophia suffered from chronic dust allergies. There was no air filter in the apartment. He could not afford one. Public elementary school on 42nd Street. Sophia was one of 20 children out of 28 in her class receiving free lunch assistance. Her teacher had written a paragraph the investigator had copied in full. Sophia is creative, gifted in drawing, a little shy. She often shares her crayons with the other children, even though hers are usually the shortest in the class. Neighbors reported that Owen frequently skipped his own dinner so that Sophia would have enough on her plate. In the week before payday, they often ate white bread with a thin, cheap tomato sauce for 3 meals in a row. The report on Gabriel Wood confirmed every word Owen had said. Workplace accident on Livingston Street, filed with the State Labor Board. Gabriel Wood listed as the biological father on Sophia's original birth certificate. A notarized will assigning guardianship to Owen Reed, dated the week Sophia came home from the hospital. At the bottom of the folder, a single sealed envelope, a DNA analysis. The investigator had lifted a hair sample from a small pink backpack Sophia had left on a bench at Greenwood on the 14th of October. Matched against the reference sample Alessandro had provided from his own comb. The result was 1 line long. 99.999% probability. Grandfather and granddaughter. Alessandro read every page. Then he read them again. He was sitting in a study lined with walnut panels and first editions, in a house of 4,000 square meters, with 5 people on staff and 12 armed men within calling distance. And somewhere across the bridge in Sunset Park, his own blood was sleeping on the top of a bunk bed above a laundromat and eating white bread for dinner. He closed the folder. He did not move for a long time. Friday afternoon, he drove himself back to Greenwood. He found Owen at the edge of Section 68, cutting back the ivy from a Victorian obelisk. Owen straightened when he saw the black car pull up, wiped his hands on his flannel, and waited. Alessandro did not open with pleasantries. He never had. Owen, I want Sophia to come and live at the Moretti estate. I want you to come with her. I am not taking my granddaughter from you. I want both of you. You will not have to think about money again. Sophia will have everything I failed to give Elena. I will pay off every dollar of the debt you carry. If you want a position on the estate, I will make one for you. If you want to keep this job, I will not interfere with a single thing about how you keep it. Owen looked at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head. I can't do that. Why? Because I know what your world is. I know what kind of enemies come with a name like yours. I have raised her 7 years to grow up ordinary. I don't want her to grow up inside a house where the men at the door wear coats to hide what's under them. Alessandro did not argue. He waited. Then, very quietly, Owen, can you sleep tonight, knowing that Sophia went to bed hungry? Can you sleep this winter, knowing she doesn't have a coat warm enough for the wind off the harbor? Owen turned his face away. He could not deny it. He had lain awake beside that bottom bunk more nights than he could count with those exact questions in his mouth. Owen, Alessandro said, and his voice had gone very gentle, gentler than it had been in any room in 40 years. I am asking you, not telling you. If she is unhappy, if she is afraid, if you see one single thing that isn't right, take her and leave. I will not stop you, but give me a chance. One chance. To do for her daughter what I failed to do for her. Owen looked at the 62-year-old man in the long black coat, the man who had once been the most feared name from Boston to Baltimore, and saw something he had never expected to see in those gray eyes. Regret. Real regret. The kind that did not perform. The kind that had lived alone in a locked room for 10 years. He nodded once. Sunday. Just past noon. Owen's old sedan turned off Jericho Turnpike and rolled down the long private lane in Old Westbury. The black iron gate opened slowly, the way heavy gates open when they have not been rushed in 40 years. 200 meters of gravel drive stretched ahead beneath twin rows of red maples that had turned the color of copper in the October light. Sophia pressed her face to the passenger window and did not speak. Her eyes moved from the maples to the stone lions at the second gate, from the fountain in the circle drive to the white columns rising above the front steps, and back again, as if she were trying to fit the whole thing into her memory before it disappeared. When Owen stopped the car and helped her out, she stood on the gravel with her small backpack strap in one hand and did not walk any farther. She only stared up at the marble stairs. Alessandro was waiting at the door. Beside him stood a small woman in a black dress and a white apron, her gray hair pinned neatly. Rosa Bianchi, 68 years old, housekeeper of the Moretti estate for 40 of those years. She had held Elena the day she was brought home from the hospital. When Rosa saw Sophia, her hand went to her mouth, then to her heart. Then she began, very quietly, to cry. Sophia leaned close to Owen and whispered, "Uncle Owen, this place is bigger than my whole school." Owen put a hand on the back of her head. Alessandro led them up the stairs and through the foyer and up the wide, curving staircase to the second floor. He opened a door at the end of the east hall. The room had been redone in 4 days, soft lavender wallpaper, a 4-poster bed with a deep green velvet coverlet, an oak drawing table by the window, set to face the rose garden below. On the table, arranged the way a shop arranges a display, a professional set of 48 colored pencils, a thick pad of Canson paper, and a leather-bound sketchbook. Sophia walked to the middle of the room and stopped. She reached out one hand and touched the velvet coverlet. She turned her face up to Owen and her eyes were not happy. They were afraid. "Uncle Owen, am I really allowed to sleep under this? Or just look at it?" Owen turned his face away so that she would not see him blink. Alessandro was standing in the doorway. He heard the question. Something old and hard behind his sternum cracked, cleanly, the way ice cracks when it finally lets go. It was a sensation he had not felt in 40 years of holding an empire together. Rosa slipped downstairs. She came back 20 minutes later with a tray, spaghetti in a simple tomato sauce, warm garlic bread, a small salad on the side. It was the exact meal she had made for Elena, once a week, on Sunday evenings, from the time Elena was 5 years old. Sophia ate the way a child eats who has learned not to leave anything on the plate. Alessandro watched. He saw the girl's small, careful hand fold the second half of the garlic bread into her napkin and tuck it against her leg. He sat down beside her. Gently. "Sophia, what are you keeping that for?" Sophia turned pink to the roots of her hair. "I was going to save it for Uncle Owen. He usually doesn't have anything for breakfast." Alessandro did not answer. He simply looked at Rosa. Rosa understood in half a second. She went out and returned in 3 minutes with a large paper bag. She set it on the table beside the bed. Inside, half a loaf of fresh garlic bread wrapped in wax paper, a wedge of Parmesan, a small package of prosciutto, and 2 glass bottles of orange juice. Rosa said, in the voice she had once used with Elena, "This is your breakfast, both of you, for tomorrow." Sophia looked into the bag and looked back at Rosa and did not seem to understand. She had never in her life seen that much food set aside for one single meal. Later, Owen helped her change into the pajamas Rosa had laid out and lifted her into the bed. Sophia reached into the pocket of her jeans and drew out a small pink pebble, the same pebble she had held at Elena's grave, and set it very carefully on the nightstand. It was the first stone of the little pyramid she had been building. She looked at it in the lamplight and whispered, so quietly that only the pebble could hear her, "Mama, tonight I am sleeping at Grandpa's house. The blanket here is very warm." Alessandro stood in the hallway just outside the door. He watched through the gap between hinge and frame. A 10-year-old girl, holding a velvet coverlet up to her chin, drifting into sleep in the soft yellow glow of a bedside lamp. For the first time in 10 years, the Moretti estate carried in its walls the steady, even breathing of a child. And for the first time in 10 years, Alessandro Moretti did not feel alone. The weeks that followed unfolded as a chain of small miracles. Sophia taught Alessandro to read a comic book with her at breakfast. She sat on the chair beside him at the long dining table and turned the pages so he could see the pictures, explaining who the characters were and why the one with the red cape was the good one. Alessandro, who had read 6 financial newspapers a morning for 40 years without missing a word, discovered that he did not know how to read a comic book properly. He held it wrong. He read the panels in the wrong order. Sophia corrected him with patient authority. "No, Grandpa. First across, then down, like a page in a book, but with pictures." She discovered the old piano in the study. It had been Elena's. It had stood closed for 10 years under a dust cover. Sophia raised the lid and pressed one key and listened to the note fade. Then she looked up at Alessandro. "Grandpa, can I teach you a song? It is called Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. My teacher says it is the first song everyone should learn." The hand that had signed shipping contracts for millions of dollars and given orders that had ended more than one man's life stumbled across the white keys, missing more notes than it hit. Sophia laughed so hard she had to sit down on the piano bench and wipe her eyes. Rosa, who had cooked for the estate for 4 decades, took Sophia into the kitchen one afternoon and taught her to make almond biscotti from the recipe of Alessandro's grandmother in Palermo. The recipe was written in faded ink on a card in a wooden box on the top shelf of the pantry. Rosa had guarded that card for 40 years. She had never taught the recipe to a single other soul. Sometimes Sophia asked questions that arrived like small, clean knives. "Grandpa, when Mama was alive, why didn't you come to her more?" Alessandro did not lie. He had promised himself, quietly, on the drive back from Greenwood that first night, that he would never lie to this child. Not once. Because I was a fool, Sophia. I thought building a large thing was the same as loving my family. I did not understand that being there every day was the only thing that mattered. Sophia took his hand in both of her small hands and looked at him with an expression too grave for a 10-year-old face. Well, now you know, and now you have me. Alessandro turned his face away so she would not see his eyes. Owen grew easier in the house, though he still kept a careful distance from the guards. He continued at Greenwood 3 days a week. It had been a condition of his own. I need my work, Alessandro. I need Sophia to see that the man who raised her does not just sit at another man's table. Alessandro had not argued. He had, in fact, done something Owen had not expected. He had asked Antonio, the family driver of 22 years, to bring Owen from the estate to the cemetery each morning in the black SUV. Owen had been embarrassed the first time. Sophia had been delighted. Uncle Owen goes to work like a man in a movie. One afternoon in the rose garden, Sophia caught both of their hands at once, Alessandro on her right, Owen on her left. Grandpa, Uncle Owen, walk with me. I want to have both of you. Alessandro looked at Owen over the top of the girl's head, and for the first time, the Mafia king and the graveyard keeper, 2 men who a month before had stood 40 steps apart under an ash tree with an entire world of suspicion between them, nodded to one another in a wordless agreement that neither would have thought possible. Rosa saw them through the kitchen window. She wiped her eyes with the edge of her apron. On the 3rd floor, in the shadow of an unlit corridor, another man was watching the same scene. Marco Bellini, 58 years old, the consigliere, who had stood at Alessandro's right hand for 20 years. Marco had come into the family when Alessandro was 38. Together they had walked through 3 family wars, 5 federal investigations, and hundreds of decisions in which one word decided who came home for dinner and who did not. Marco had come to think of himself as Alessandro's true brother, closer than any blood, closer than the son who had walked out of the house 4 years ago. But something behind Marco's eyes as he watched the child in the garden was not warm. This girl, if she stayed, would change everything about the Moretti empire. The boss had begun missing meetings. The boss had begun softening. The boss had begun using the word family in a way that no longer included a certain 58-year-old man from Bay Ridge. Marco turned. He walked back into his private office at the end of the 3rd floor corridor. He closed the door. He took a burner phone from the locked drawer of his desk. He pressed 1 number. A low voice answered on the 2nd ring. It was a voice no one else inside the Moretti estate had ever heard. Victor De Luca. Alessandro understood, in the days that followed the walk in the rose garden, that if he wanted Sophia to have a real family, he would have to build one bridge he had refused to walk across for 4 years. He picked up the phone in the study 3 separate evenings. 3 separate evenings he set it down again. On the 4th, he made himself dial. Lorenzo Moretti, 36 years old. 6 years older than Elena had been on the night she died. For the last 4 of those years, he had been running an independent crew in Philadelphia, one he had built with his own hands, on his own terms, without a dollar from the Moretti treasury. Roughly 40 men, 2 nightclubs off Broad Street in South Philly, a small underground card room in Fishtown that turned enough weekly cash to keep the lights on, a protection network across a stretch of Italian restaurants in Bella Vista, the kind of arrangement that was old-fashioned but paid on time, not large enough to threaten the 5 families of New York, large enough to prove to a father that a son could stand on his own without inheriting the name. 4 years, not a call between them, not a letter. Alessandro had treated the silence as betrayal. Lorenzo had treated it as the first free air he had breathed in his life. The phone rang 3 times before it was picked up. "What is it, father?" The voice on the other end was cold. It had been cold in Alessandro's memory for 4 years, but the cold in it now was somehow older, more settled, the cold of a man who had made peace with the temperature. Alessandro did not soften it. He never had. "Lorenzo, you have a niece, Elena's daughter. I want you to meet her." For a long moment there was no sound at all on the line. Only the hum of a bar or a kitchen somewhere in Philadelphia behind him. Then, quietly, "Are you joking with me?" Alessandro told him. Short sentences. The cemetery, the groundskeeper, the letter Gabriel had left for a man who might one day come looking, the independent investigation, the DNA report. Lorenzo did not interrupt. When Alessandro stopped speaking, Lorenzo asked one question. "Are you sure?" "I am sure. She has Elena's eyes." They agreed to meet in a small neutral restaurant in Trenton, New Jersey, roughly halfway between them. Neither of them named it aloud, but both understood. Neither man would set foot on the other man's territory yet. Alessandro arrived 30 minutes early. He sat in a booth at the back with a glass of water he did not touch. When Lorenzo walked in, Alessandro almost did not recognize his own son. The boy who had left the estate 4 years ago at the end of a shouting match had been thin, furious, still a boy. The man who walked through the door now was thickened at the shoulders, hard around the jaw, gray already coming in at the temples. 2 men stood outside the door and did not come in. Lorenzo's eyes swept the room the way a man's eyes sweep a room when he has spent 4 years teaching himself to see every exit. It was the walk of a boss. 4 years, Alessandro thought, and my son has built himself. Lorenzo sat down opposite him and did not order a drink. 4 years of silence, he said. His voice was flat. 4 years without a phone call. Not a text. Not a word when I opened the first club. Not a word when the papers ran that piece about me last spring. You treated me like I was dead. And now you call. For a child. Alessandro did not argue. He nodded once. He drew a photograph from the inside pocket of his coat and set it on the table between them. Rosa had taken it the week before. Sophia in the rose garden, laughing at something the wind had done to her braids, the gray-blue eyes lit from behind by the afternoon sun. Lorenzo picked up the photograph. He looked at it for a long time. When he raised his face, the steel had gone out of his eyes by a small measure. Elena's eyes, he whispered. Alessandro told him more. About Gabriel, about Owen, about the letter under the ash tree. Lorenzo did not interrupt him a second time. He kept the photograph in his hand and turned it over now and then, like a man weighing something. Finally he said, "What do you want from me, father? I am not coming home to the family. I have a life in Philly. I am not turning the crew over. I built it without you, and I will keep it without you. I am not asking you to come back," Alessandro said. "I am asking you to meet your niece. I want Sophia to know she has an uncle. That is all." Lorenzo set the photograph down. He looked at it once more. Then he looked at his father with an expression Alessandro could not read. "Sunday," he said at last. "I will come to the house on Sunday. To meet her." He stood up. He put on his coat. At the edge of the booth he stopped and did not turn around. "But do not think, father, that because there is a child, I have forgiven you. I am coming for her, not for you." He walked out. Sunday. Lorenzo drove up the private lane in Old Westbury for the first time in 4 years. He did not come alone. Nico rode in the passenger seat. Salvatore was in the back, the 2 most trusted men from the Philadelphia crew, both former Marines, both silent, both watching the trees on either side of the road with the flat professional gaze of men who had already mapped every angle a shooter could use. The iron gate opened. The black sedan rolled through. Nico and Salvatore stepped out with Lorenzo, but did not follow him toward the house. They stood by the car in dark overcoats, hands folded in front of them, eyes moving over the grounds. Bruno, standing at the top of the steps, drew his shoulders back a fraction. He did not like outside men on Moretti gravel, but Alessandro had given the order that morning, and Bruno, who had served the estate for 11 years, obeyed without a word. Rosa was waiting on the front steps in her black dress and white apron. When Lorenzo came up the stairs, she did not speak. She only put her hand to her mouth and looked at him with wet eyes. Lorenzo nodded to her. He could not bring himself to say hello. 4 years was a long time to say hello to. Alessandro was waiting inside the foyer. "She is in the rose garden," he said. Antonio was standing at a discreet distance in the garden, keeping watch without seeming to, while Sophia sat on a small folding stool with her sketchbook on her knees. The October sun was on her hair. She was working on something with the concentration of a jeweler at a bench. Alessandro walked out first. Lorenzo followed a step behind. "Sophia, this is your Uncle Lorenzo, my son, your mother's brother." Sophia set her pencil down very carefully across the top of the sketchbook, the way Elena had once set hers down. She stood up. She walked across the gravel path in her 2 large sneakers and stopped in front of him. She tilted her head back to look up at the tall man in the dark coat. "You look like Mama," she said. "In the picture Grandpa showed me, she has the same eyes as you." Lorenzo did not move for several seconds. He had lived 4 years inside a world of guns, cash, and men who carried both. He had trained himself to be prepared for every kind of sentence a person could speak to his face. He had not prepared for that one. He crouched down until his eyes were level with hers. "Sophia, my name is Lorenzo." She reached to her sketchbook, tore out a page, and held it up. 3 figures under a red maple. An old man in a black coat, a younger man in a flannel shirt, and a blank space between them. "I saved this spot for you," she said. "I drew it yesterday because Grandpa said you were coming." Lorenzo took the drawing. The paper was slightly damp from the grass. His hand shook, once. He did not remember the last time anyone had drawn anything for him. Sophia caught his other hand and pulled. "Come on. I will show you the house." She led him through the kitchen, where Rosa was already teaching Sophia to make biscotti from Alessandro's grandmother's recipe. She led him past the study, where the old piano stood open now, sheet music of Twinkle Twinkle Little Star propped up on the rack. She led him to the rose garden path where, she informed him, Owen came on weekends to help prune the bushes. Lorenzo listened. He said very little. He nodded when nodding was called for. Lunch was at the long dining table. 4 places. Alessandro at the head, Lorenzo on his right, Owen on his left. Sophia between Alessandro and Owen so she could hold both their hands under the tablecloth. She did not stop talking. She asked Lorenzo what he did. Lorenzo hesitated. He could not tell a 10-year-old girl about back rooms and protection payments. He said, carefully, "I run a couple of nightclubs and some restaurants in Philadelphia." Sophia nodded with great seriousness. "Do any of your restaurants have good cannoli?" "Rosa says the cannoli in Philadelphia is better than in New York." Lorenzo Moretti laughed. For the first time in 4 years, a real laugh, the kind that started somewhere below the sternum. Nico, who had known him for all of those 4 years, would not have recognized the sound. After lunch, Alessandro and Lorenzo walked in the garden alone. "I know about the crew in Philly," Alessandro said. "I know what you have built. You are better than I thought." Lorenzo stiffened. "Did you come to congratulate me, or to tell me to hand it back?" "Neither. I came to tell you I was wrong. You have the right to your own life. I am not asking for anything." For the first time in 4 years, father and son spoke for more than 5 minutes without shouting. On the 3rd floor, at a window at the end of an unlit corridor, Marco Bellini stood watching the 2 figures walking together in the rose garden below. Something moved behind his eyes that would have frightened anyone who saw it, but no one saw it. That night, in the private office at the end of the hall, he opened the drawer and lifted the burner phone again. He dialed 1 number. When Victor De Luca answered, Marco said only one thing. "He is back. We have to move sooner than we planned." 2 nights after Lorenzo left the estate, Marco Bellini knocked once on the study door and let himself in. He carried a slim folder bound in brown leather. The set of his shoulders was heavy. His face had been arranged, during the walk down from the 3rd floor, into the face of a man about to deliver an unwanted truth. Alessandro was at his desk, reading a quarterly financial report. He looked up. "What is it?" Marco closed the door behind him with the careful respect of 20 years, and sat down in the leather chair opposite the desk. When he spoke, his voice was low, weighted, each word placed like a stone. "Alessandro, I have been silent for 10 years. I have been silent because I did not want to give you pain. But now Lorenzo has come back into this house, and I cannot be silent any longer." Alessandro set the report down. His body went still in the way it went still before a decision was about to be made. "Speak," Marco told him. There had been a rumor, from the first days after the accident, that Elena's death was not what it seemed. Marco had heard it in a back room in Newark within a week of the funeral. He had not brought it to Alessandro then. He had chosen instead to investigate it himself, quietly, over the course of 10 years, so as not to torment his boss with a whisper that might be nothing. Alessandro's fist closed on the edge of the desk. His voice came out low and sharp. "Elena died in a car accident. Rain. A slick road. The police investigated. The file was closed." "What are you telling me, Marco?" "I loved that girl like she was my own daughter," Marco said quietly. "I held her when she was a baby. I did not want to reopen this for you, but this is what I have found." He opened the folder. He drew out the first photograph and slid it across the desk. It was a surveillance shot, taken from across a street. 2 men at a table by the window of a bar in Atlantic City. One of them was clearly, unmistakably Lorenzo. The other was a lean man in his 40s with a stubble beard and grease-stained hands. The date stamp in the corner read 3 days before Elena's death. Alessandro's heart slowed. He picked up the photograph. "The other man's name is Frank Delgado," Marco said, "a mechanic at a small garage in Newark. 6 months after Elena's accident, he was found dead of a heroin overdose in a rooming house in Patterson, officially recorded as accidental. But you have known me a long time, Alessandro. Do you believe that was an accidental overdose?" He drew out the second document, a copy of the autopsy report. Marco touched one line with the tip of his finger. The injection site was in the left arm. Frank Delgado was left-handed. His medical records show that clearly. A left-handed man does not shoot up in his dominant arm. Alessandro read the line. Then he read it again. His face lost color slowly, the way the color goes out of a photograph left in sun. Marco let him read for a full minute before he placed the last piece. Alessandro. 4 years after Elena died, Lorenzo walked out of this house and went to Philadelphia and built himself a crew. Have you ever asked yourself where the money came from? A 32-year-old with no bank line, no family backing, no partners on record, does not put together 40 guns and 3 operating locations in 24 months on a savings account. He set another sheet on the desk, rows of offshore account movements, highlighted in yellow, the entries stacked in a neat column. I have been tracing the family's offshore accounts for the last 3 years. In the 2 years before Lorenzo left the estate, roughly $5 million was withdrawn in a pattern I could not explain. Small amounts, different banks, never enough to trigger an audit. Always signed off through the ledger channel your daughter was helping me keep. Alessandro stared at the columns. Marco leaned forward slightly. Elena found it, Alessandro. I do not know when. Some evening working the books with me, or looking over my shoulder at a screen. She suspected her brother. She was going to bring it to you. She did not get the chance. Alessandro sat with the folder open in front of him, and the world quietly rearranging itself. For 10 years he had blamed a rainstorm. He had blamed a slick stretch of the coastal road. He had blamed himself for every dinner he had missed, every party he had let her go to alone, every time he had failed to be a father. But he had not had a name. He had not had a reason. Now he had one, and that name was the name of the son he had eaten breakfast with 2 days ago. Marco closed the folder gently. He rose. He bowed his head with the small, exact grief of a man who had done a hard thing out of love. Alessandro, I may be wrong. I hope I am wrong. This is everything I have. I give it to you. The decision is yours. He walked out. The door closed behind him with the softness of 20 years of loyalty. Alessandro did not eat that night. He did not sleep. He sat at the desk under the lamp until the sky above the rose garden began to turn the first color of gray, reading each page again and again, until his eyes burned. In the unlit corridor of the 3rd floor, Marco Bellini stood alone at the top of the stairs and smiled. The next morning, Marco returned to the study with a second folder, thicker than the first. He set it down on the desk without a word and let Alessandro open it. An offshore account statement in Lorenzo's name. A wire transfer of $50,000 to an account belonging to Frank Delgado, dated 11 days before Elena's accident. Marco tapped the account number with one finger. This is the same account Lorenzo used to draw from the family treasury before he left. The same account he used to build his crew in Philadelphia. Cell tower data for Lorenzo's phone on the night of the accident, plotting his position within a 2-mile radius of the coastal road at the exact hour Elena's car had left the guardrail. A single sheet of paper, folded in 3, that had been kept in an evidence bag. Frank Delgado's signed statement, dated 2 weeks before his overdose. It read, in a mechanic's uneven hand, I received $50,000 from Lorenzo Moretti to alter the braking system on his sister Elena's car. I did the work at a lot in Bayonne on the 10th. I know I will not live long after signing this, but I want it written down. Marco laid the last stone. Do you remember, Alessandro, that Elena told you in her last months that she thought someone was moving money out of the family accounts? She suspected Lorenzo. She was going to bring it to you that week. She did not get the chance. And notice this. Within 1 year of her death, Lorenzo left the estate and went to Philadelphia with capital he could never explain. Alessandro read the papers a second time, then a third. He said nothing. He picked up the phone on the desk and told Antonio to bring Lorenzo to the estate at 10 o'clock that night. 10 o'clock, the library. Alessandro at the head of the long walnut table. Marco standing 3 steps behind his boss, head slightly bowed. Bruno at the door with one hand at his side. Lorenzo, brought in from the driveway without warning of what was coming, sat down slowly in the chair opposite his father. Alessandro slid the first photograph across the table. Lorenzo's face went white. I have never met this man, he said. His voice shook. I do not know a Frank Delgado. I have never spoken to him in my life. The $50,000 from that account, I did not send it. The money I used in Philly, I borrowed it. From Anthony Ricci, from Marco Ferretti, from Vincent Palermo. 3 men. I have the note signed. I can prove it. Then prove it, Alessandro said. Call Ricci. Now. Lorenzo took out his phone with a hand that was already shaking. He dialed. The line rang, and rang. Voicemail. He dialed Marco Ferretti. It rang out. He dialed Vincent Palermo. Rang out. 3 men. The only 3 men in the world who could confirm his story. Not one of them picked up. He did not know, and would not know for another 2 days, that Marco Bellini had prepared for this moment for 3 months. Anthony Ricci was on a cruise ship off St. Lucia, in international water, with no signal on his phone. The other two were sitting at that very moment inside a locked apartment in Elizabeth, New Jersey, watched by 2 men on Marco's private payroll, their phones taken from them at the door. Lorenzo lowered the phone. Water welled up in his eyes. He looked at Alessandro across the walnut table and his voice broke. "Father, I swear on Elena's grave, I did not kill my sister. I loved Elena. I could not have." Alessandro cut him off. His voice was cold. It was the voice from 40 years ago, the one that had opened boardrooms and closed contracts, and been the last voice a certain kind of man ever heard. "But every trace leads to you. A photograph of you meeting Delgado, your account moving the money to him, your phone at the site the night my daughter died, his signed statement naming you, and $5 million you have never explained, sitting under your feet in Philadelphia. Explain it." Lorenzo did not explain. He could not. Every piece was placed too perfectly for any explanation he had. Alessandro looked at his son across the table with eyes that had gone dead. He was not looking at the boy he had held as a baby. He was not looking at the young man who had shouted him down at the front door 4 years ago. He was looking at the person who had killed Elena. Behind him, Marco stood with his head bowed, playing the role of a man broken by a truth he had not wanted to speak. Inside, Marco had been waiting for this moment for 10 years. Alessandro pushed his chair back and stood. "You are stripped of every right, every title, every share you hold in this family. Bruno, take him down." Lorenzo rose. He was still trying to speak. Bruno crossed the room in 4 steps and took his arm. Father, please." "I did not." Alessandro did not turn around. He did not look at his son's face. He heard Lorenzo shouting his name all the way to the door of the library, all the way down the corridor, all the way to the top of the stairs that led to the cellar. Then the door at the base of the stairs closed, and the shouting became a muffled sound, and then no sound at all. Alessandro sat back down in his chair. Marco, still standing 3 steps behind him, did not move. "You were right," Alessandro said. "I owe you." Marco lowered his head another fraction and answered in the quietest voice he had used in 20 years. "No, Alessandro. I only did my duty." The cellar beneath the Moretti estate had been built during Prohibition. Alessandro's great-grandfather, a bootlegger out of Little Italy, had used it to hide barrels of smuggled Canadian whiskey behind a false wall of shelving. Later generations of the family had found other uses for the space. Over 4 generations of Morettis, the cellar had held rivals. It had held informants. It had held men who had come into that house with one story and had left with another. It had never, in 100 years, held someone with the family name. Until tonight. Bruno led Lorenzo down the narrow steel spiral staircase. 2 of Bruno's men walked behind. Lorenzo did not resist. He knew what resistance looked like inside these walls, and he knew none of it would matter now. At the end of the short concrete corridor was a door of steel plate. Bruno unlocked it. Inside was a room 4 meters square, bare cement walls, a single bulb hanging from a wire, an old army blanket folded on the floor. No window, no chair. Bruno stepped aside. Lorenzo walked in on his own feet, not because he agreed to, but because he refused to be dragged. The door closed behind him. The lock turned. He sat down slowly on the cement. He did not weep. He did not shout. He looked up at the bulb and tried to make his mind understand what had just happened. 2 floors above, in the lavender bedroom on the east side of the 2nd story, Sophia stirred in her sleep. She had gone to bed with the pink pebble on the nightstand and Owen sitting in the reading chair beside her, because tonight, for a reason she could not name, she had asked him to stay near. The muffled sound of a shout, 3 floors down and 1 corridor over, had reached her the way such sounds reach a child. Not as words, only as the shape of something wrong. She opened her eyes. She looked at Owen. He was asleep in the chair, still in his shirt sleeves. She slipped out of the bed on bare feet. The hallway was long and dim, lit only by one wall, sconce turned low. She saw her grandfather at the far end. He was standing very still, his hand against the wall as if to hold himself up. She ran to him. "Grandpa, what happened?" I heard Uncle Lorenzo shouting. Alessandro turned and crouched down. He tried to steady his voice. He almost succeeded. "Sophia, Uncle Lorenzo has done something wrong. Grandpa has to keep him downstairs for a little while, until he understands what he did." Sophia shook her head. Her braids came loose over her shoulders. Her voice was small and trembling. "But Uncle Lorenzo is not bad. He promised he would teach me to draw buildings. He laughed when I talked about cannoli. He is not a bad person, Grandpa." Alessandro could not answer. Owen appeared in the corridor a moment later, barefoot, hair still crushed on one side from the chair. He took in the sight of Sophia in her nightgown, and Alessandro crouched at her level, and understood without needing to be told. He knelt down and lifted Sophia into his arms. She began to cry into his shoulder. Owen looked at Alessandro over the top of her head. His eyes asked one question. Alessandro said only, "Owen, take her back to her room." Owen turned to go. At the door of the corridor he stopped, without setting her down, and looked back. "Are you sure about this, Alessandro? If he is innocent, you will lose your son a second time." Alessandro did not answer. He stood in the empty corridor with one hand still against the wall, listening to Owen's footsteps carry his granddaughter away. He walked back to the library. He sat down under the lamp. He opened the folder again. He read every page for the 10th time. The photograph, the autopsy line, the wire transfer, the cell tower map, the signed statement. Every piece fit. Every piece pointed at Lorenzo. But Sophia's small, trembling voice kept repeating itself in his head. "He is not a bad person, Grandpa." He raised his eyes. The portrait of Elena hung above the mantel. 22 years old in the painting. Painted the summer before the accident. Alessandro had commissioned it himself. He had not looked at it directly in 10 years. He looked now. Elena's eyes in the painting were the same eyes he had seen in Sophia's face beneath the maple, and in the painted stillness of them, as he sat there under the lamp, he seemed to see something he did not want to see. Not anger, reproach. He looked away. 3 floors below, in the cellar under a single bare bulb, Lorenzo sat with his back against the cement wall and the old army blanket across his knees. He spoke to Elena. "I do not understand what is happening. I did not do this. I do not know how any of it is on my name. But I will not die down here. Not until Father knows the truth." He did not know, as he sat there alone in the concrete, that 3 floors above his head, a 10-year-old girl he had met exactly once was already the only hope he had left. 3 nights after Lorenzo went into the cellar, Sophia could not sleep. She lay under the velvet coverlet in her lavender room and turned over and could not stop seeing Uncle Lorenzo's face at the dining table, the way he had laughed when she asked him about cannoli. Grown-ups do not laugh like that when they are bad. She had watched Owen laugh her whole life. She knew the sound. At midnight she sat up. She reached for the small pink pebble on the nightstand and closed her fingers around it. It was cool and smooth, and she thought that if she was holding it she would be brave enough to walk down the corridor and find Grandpa and ask him please to let Uncle Lorenzo come upstairs. She slipped out of bed in her nightgown and bare feet. The corridor beyond her door was long and dark, lit only by 2 small sconces turned very low. She had walked this route in the daytime a dozen times. In the night it looked different. The runner rug that seemed short in the afternoon seemed to stretch on forever. She reached the intersection where the east and west wings of the 2nd story met. In her mind she was certain her grandfather's room was to the right. She turned right. She had never been in the east wing. She walked past 3 closed doors before she began to feel that something was wrong. The wallpaper here was darker. The air smelled of old cedar. There was no light at the far end. She was about to turn back when she heard voices. Low, male, coming from behind a door that was set slightly ajar at the far end of the corridor. A thin strip of yellow lamplight fell across the runner. Sophia stopped. Curiosity, the way curiosity works in a child, moved her 3 careful steps closer. She held her breath and put one eye to the gap. Inside a small side room she saw 4 men. Marco Bellini was standing at the head of a long table. He had a large map spread out across the wood. 3 men stood around it. 2 of them wore the black suits she had seen on guards downstairs. The 3rd was a stranger she had never seen before. A lean man with a long pale scar running from the lobe of his left ear down to his jaw. Marco's voice was not the voice he used with her grandfather. It was cold. It was giving orders. There was no bowing in it. Sophia did not understand every word. She was 10, but she heard every word, and every word stayed in her head the way things stay in a child's head when the child does not yet know how to forget them. On the day Alessandro passes sentence on Lorenzo before the family council, Marco said, 4 nights from now, Victor's people move simultaneously on all 8 primary Moretti locations. The weapons have been quietly walked out of the warehouses over the last 3 months. The crates still weigh the right amount because I filled them with stone and packing sand. The 4 captains who run Newark, Queens, the Bronx, and Staten Island have been on my payroll since summer, $2 million ahead. On the night, they will pull their men off station. The port route out of Newark has already been handed to Victor. Alessandro will have nothing left to defend himself with. The man with the scar spoke in a low voice. And the old boss? Marco smiled. Sophia had never seen that smile on his face before. Every morning of the last month he had bowed to her in the foyer and wished her good morning. This was not the mouth that had done that. My people inside the house handle him that same night. There are 4 men on Bruno's roster who are, in fact, mine. They have been waiting 10 years for the order. Alessandro will die in his own bed. The first man in the black suit lifted his head. And the child. And the groundskeeper. Marco's voice went flat. The child. Victor's choice. He may want to keep her for leverage with the other families, or he may simply close the loop. I do not care either way. The groundskeeper we close. We leave no witnesses. Sophia's hands went up to her mouth. She pressed them hard against her face so that her breath would not make a sound. Something in her stomach had turned to ice, and something behind her eyes had begun to burn. She did not understand everything that had just been said, but she understood enough. Someone wanted to kill Grandpa, someone wanted to kill Uncle Lorenzo, someone wanted to kill Uncle Owen, and someone might want to kill her too. Then Marco spoke again, and what he said next froze the blood inside her small body. 20 years I have served that man like a dog. On that night, I will be the new boss of the Moretti family. And Elena, I already made pay for coming too close to my ledgers. 10 years ago, I only had courage enough for her. Tonight, I have courage for the rest. Sophia's ears filled with a high, thin sound. Mama Elena. Marco had just said Mama Elena. Marco was the man who had killed her mother. The pink pebble grew slippery in Sophia's fist. Her small palm had gone damp with sweat. She did not feel it until the stone was already sliding out from between her fingers. It hit the wood floor of the corridor with a small, clean sound. It rolled. It rolled 3 feet along the polished boards and struck the ceramic foot of a tall Chinese vase set on a low console table against the wall. The vase rocked. The vase fell. The sound of glazed porcelain shattering across a wooden floor filled the entire east corridor. Inside the room, Marco's voice cracked out. Who is that? Sophia turned and ran. Behind her a door was flung open. She heard the 2 guards in the black suits burst into the hallway. Feet in heavy shoes hit the wooden floor and started to close on her fast. She ran in her house slippers, her braids flying behind her, her heart beating so hard it hurt her chest. Her mind raced faster than her feet. She would never make it back to Grandpa's room the way she had come. They would catch her before she reached the intersection. Then she remembered. Owen. 2 weeks ago, in the reading room on the 2nd floor, he had pointed at the tall walnut bookcase in the far corner and said, half smiling, "This corner is from Prohibition, sweetheart. Only a few people in the house know about it. Your grandpa told me on the first day. It is a good hiding place if you ever get tired of grown-ups." She had laughed then. She had thought it was a story. She turned hard left, into the reading room, and pulled the door shut behind her, the corner bookcase. She pushed. Nothing moved. She pushed again, and this time she felt for the small brass catch Owen had shown her tucked behind the 3rd shelf. She pressed it. The bookcase swung inward, silent on old iron hinges. Sophia slipped through into a narrow stone passage. She turned and pulled the bookcase closed behind her. It clicked into place. The world went dark. 2 seconds later, the door of the reading room banged open. 2 pairs of heavy footsteps entered. She heard the 2 men breathing hard. She heard the closet door yanked open. She heard the curtain by the window pulled aside. Sophia stood inside the wall, holding her breath, holding the wall itself with both hands, because her legs had begun to shake. Above her head, thin cracks in the ceiling let down a few narrow bars of moonlight. She waited. 1 minute, 2, 5. She heard the men leave the reading room. She heard them shout something to each other from farther down the corridor. She heard doors open and close, one after another. When the footsteps faded to nothing, she began to move. The passage ran along the inside of the walls of the 2nd story. Owen had told her it linked to Grandpa's own private wing. She counted her way in the dark, her fingers trailing the cold stone. She found a wooden panel she could push. It opened into the back of a closet. She pushed the closet door open a crack. She smelled leather and cedar and her grandfather's cologne. She stepped out through his suits. Alessandro was sitting in the armchair by the window. He had not slept. He was looking out at the rose garden under a full moon. Sophia flew across the room and threw both arms around his neck. He startled violently. For half a second, the reflex of 40 years brought his hand up. Then he saw the small body pressed against his chest and the arms tight around him, and his own arms came around her at once. He felt her shaking. All of her, every part of a small body shaking at once. Sophia, what is it? What happened? She could not speak yet. Her breath came in ragged pieces. Her heart was hammering against his ribs. He lifted her onto the chair beside him and turned her small face up to his. "Sophia, tell Grandpa what happened," she told him. Every word Marco had spoken in the side room in the East Wing. Every name, every number, every detail of the plan. The 8 bases, the 4 captains bought at $2 million each, the empty crates in the warehouses, the port route handed to Victor, 4 men on Bruno's roster who were not Bruno's, her grandpa in his own bed on the night Uncle Lorenzo was to be sentenced, Uncle Owen to be killed for being a witness, herself, given as choice to a stranger, and at the end, the sentence that had turned everything to ice. "Grandpa," he said. He said he was the one who made Mama Elena pay, because she was going to find his ledgers. "Grandpa, Marco killed Mama." Alessandro listened. At first, inside himself, he did not believe. Marco, 20 years at his shoulder. Marco, who had walked with him through 3 family wars and 5 federal investigations. Marco, a traitor. Marco, the man who had taken Elena, but he looked into Sophia's face. He saw the terror still shaking her hands. He heard the exactness of the details a 10-year-old could not invent, and in his head, the rest began to fall into place. Why all 3 of Lorenzo's witnesses had failed to answer their phones on the same night. Why Marco had been the one to happen to find the evidence at exactly the moment Lorenzo returned to the house. Why every trace pointed at Lorenzo with the kind of neat, unbroken clarity that never occurs in life without a hand behind it. The ground gave way beneath Alessandro Moretti for the second time in 1 month. He had almost put his only surviving son to death for the crime committed by the man he had trusted more than any brother. He gripped Sophia's small hand. His voice broke. "Sophia, you have saved this whole family. Forgive me, and forgive Uncle Lorenzo." Then he crossed the room to the desk. He picked up the internal phone. He dialed 2 numbers he had not dialed together in 10 years. "Bruno, Antonio, my room. Now. Quietly. Bring only yourselves." His voice, when he put the receiver down, had gone hard as steel. "Prepare yourselves. We have work to do tonight." Owen was awake and in Alessandro's private wing within 4 minutes of the call. Alessandro did not explain everything. He did not have the time. He put Sophia's hand into Owen's hand and said, in a voice that permitted no argument, "Do not leave this room. Do not open this door for anyone but me. If you hear gunfire in the house, take her into the closet passage. Sophia knows the way." Owen looked once at the shaking child pressed against his side and once at Alessandro's face, and understood without further words. He nodded. Bruno handed Alessandro a 9mm and a spare magazine. Antonio was already loaded. The 3 of them left the room by the servant's stair at the back of the wing, avoiding every corridor where one of Marco's men might have been posted. They moved in silence. They took a maintenance stairway down to the cellar that most of the house did not know existed, coming out on the far side of the corridor from the steel door. Alessandro drew the master key from the ring at his belt. He unlocked the heavy plate. The bulb inside was still burning. Lorenzo was sitting on the cement with his back against the wall, the old army blanket across his knees, 4 days of stubble on his jaw. His eyes had gone deep into their sockets. He looked up when the door opened. When he saw his father, he spoke very quietly. "Have you come to kill me, father?" Alessandro walked into the cell. He set the pistol down on the cement. He knelt. He had never knelt to his son. In 62 years, he had never knelt to any living man. "Lorenzo, forgive me." He told him everything, every word Sophia had heard through the gap in the door of the East Wing. Marco, Victor, the 8 bases, the 4 captains, the empty crates, the men on Bruno's roster who were not Bruno's, the ledger Elena had been about to bring to her father, the reason she had died. Lorenzo listened without moving. When Alessandro stopped speaking, Lorenzo said only, "I told you I was innocent, and you believed Marco over me. 4 days in this room, father. 4 days I thought you would come down here to put a bullet in me." Alessandro did not argue. "I have been wrong, Lorenzo. I was wrong 10 years ago while Elena was still alive. I was wrong 4 years ago when you walked out of the house. I was wrong the night I put you here. Right now I ask only one thing. Help me save this family tonight. When it is done, I will stand in front of you and take whatever punishment you decide." Lorenzo looked at his father for a long moment. Then he stood up. He did not say he forgave him. He did not embrace him. He simply reached out and took the pistol Bruno was holding out for him, and checked the chamber with the practiced motion of a man who had lived 4 years in a world where a chamber check was a habit that kept you alive. "Is my niece safe? Sophia is safe. Owen is with her." Lorenzo nodded once. He held out his hand to Bruno for a phone. Bruno passed him one. Lorenzo dialed a number from memory. "Nico, Move the 20 best men now. Take Route 1 north. Stay off Interstate 95. Keep it below the radar. Be at the estate in Old Westbury by 4 in the morning. There is a war." He hung up. Alessandro watched him. Something clicked into place inside his chest. For 4 years he had treated Lorenzo's Philadelphia crew as a betrayal. Tonight it was going to be the weapon that saved his family. Anthony Ricci and the 2 other witnesses had not answered because Marco had reached them first. Nico and the 20 men still would. They would come. At that moment, 3 floors up, Marco Bellini received the same alert. One of the guards who was in fact on his payroll had noticed the wrong men going down the wrong stairs at the wrong hour. A single text reached the burner phone at his desk. Movement in the cellar. Bruno and Antonio with the boss. Marco did not panic. He had lived 20 years next to a man who ate panic for breakfast, and he had learned. He opened the desk drawer. He drew the pistol. He picked up the burner and dialed one number. Victor. Tonight. Not 4 nights from now. Tonight. He walked out of the office. 4 men fell in behind him in the corridor without a word. Together they went down the back stairs, out into the rose garden, and over the low stone wall at the far end of the property. Within 3 minutes they were gone into the tree line beyond. Alessandro and Lorenzo came up the main stairs at the same moment. Bruno met them at the top. His face already changed. "Alessandro, Marco has gone." Over the back wall, 4 men with him, and he stopped. His breath came short. "And what?" "Newark went in at 11 o'clock, Queens at 11:15, the Bronx at 11:30. All 7 of the primary locations are under simultaneous attack. 4 of the captains surrendered without firing a round. Newark, Queens, the Bronx, Staten Island." Alessandro's grip on the pistol tightened. The empire he had built in 40 years was falling in 4 hours, but this time he was not standing alone. His voice, when it came, was the voice of the old boss. "Prepare the house. They are coming here." Within 3 hours the Moretti empire tilted. Victor De Luca had thrown every man he had against the 8 primary Moretti locations at the same minute. The warehouses in Newark, the freight yards in Queens, the front office suites in the financial district, the underground rooms in Atlantic City. 4 of the 8 captains, the 4 Marco had bought in the summer, walked out with their hands in the air and gave their keys to the first man who came through the door. Not a shot fired at 4 locations. At the other 3, the men who had not been bought stood their ground. Blood ran in 5 boroughs of New York. On Long Island, at the estate in Old Westbury, Alessandro assembled what he had left. Roughly 30 men, Bruno, Antonio, 28 guards who had been on the estate roll for more than 10 years. He walked the line personally. He looked into each face. He asked each man one short question about a moment in the past that only a truly loyal man would remember. He did not trust judgment tonight. He trusted memory. 2 men failed the question. They were disarmed and locked into a storeroom off the kitchen before either could reach for a phone. 28 remained. Bruno took command of the outer perimeter, the main gate, the service gate, the rose garden wall. He placed shooters at the second-floor windows facing the drive and behind the low stone parapet of the west terrace. Antonio took the ground floor and the interior entries. Rosa moved Sophia and Owen down into the wine cellar beneath the west basement. It was the safest room in the house. 2-foot-thick fieldstone walls, 1 steel door, no windows. Racks of dusty Barolo and Barbaresco climbed to the ceiling on both sides. Before she closed the door, Rosa opened the tiny silver box she had carried in her apron pocket for 10 years. Inside was a fine silver chain with a small silver cross. She had taken it off Elena's neck in the hospital on the night of the accident. She had kept it in that box every day since. She lifted it now and slipped it over Sophia's head. "Cara, you wear this tonight. Your mama will look after you." Sophia held the cross in one hand and the pink pebble in the other and pressed against Owen's chest. She did not cry. She had been crying for 3 hours and there were no tears left in her. Upstairs in the study, Alessandro handed Lorenzo a long gun and a box of ammunition. His voice was quiet. "I am sorry for pulling you into this. If we live through tonight, I will give you your life back." Lorenzo checked the chamber, seated the magazine, and looked up at his father. The steel was still in his eyes, but the ice had gone out of it. "Sophia is my niece. I stay." Outside the estate at 3:30 in the morning, the first vehicles of Victor's convoy rolled up the private lane in a single dark file. 12 black SUVs, headlights off. Marco Bellini was seated in the front passenger seat of the lead vehicle. At the same instant, coming up from the south on Route 1, Nico and 20 men of the Philadelphia crew reached the tree line at the edge of Old Westbury. They hid the cars in the pines a quarter mile from the gate, stepped out into the cold October air, and began to move on foot along the fence line toward the east garden entrance. Lorenzo had walked them through the property over the phone 40 minutes earlier. At the front gate, Bruno's voice came calm and low into the radio at his shoulder. "They are here. Open fire." The lead SUV rammed the iron gate at 40 miles an hour. The gate broke with a sound like a bone snapping. The vehicle shot up the gravel drive. From the second-story window above the front door, Bruno's first shot went through the windshield of the lead SUV. The driver's head snapped back. The vehicle veered off the drive and struck one of the old maples along the row with a crash of metal on wood. 4 men rolled out of the SUV and returned fire at the windows of the estate. Rounds punched through the leaded glass. Panes exploded into the room in bright showers. The battle had begun. Alessandro and Lorenzo stood back to back in the main hall at the top of the great staircase. 2 men of the same blood. An empire split down the middle for 4 years, now welded together again in a single narrow moment where either they lived together or they died together. Alessandro thought, in the small, still corner of his mind that had watched every night of his life, that in 40 years of running this family he had never imagined that the night he lost it all would look like this. He also thought, in the same still corner, that in 40 years he had never imagined he would stand next to his son again. From the east, at the edge of the rose garden, Nico's voice went low into the earpiece of every man in the Philadelphia crew. Now, 20 guns opened up on the flank of Victor's men from behind. The rear vehicles of the convoy caught rounds in the engine blocks and in the drivers. Screams cut across the gravel. The full battle was on across every inch of the Moretti grounds. The battle went on until nearly 4 in the morning. Nico and 4 of the Philadelphia men had reached the east gate at exactly the right minute. They pinned down one arm of Victor's convoy in the gravel between the 2 rows of maples and would not let it advance. Bruno held the outer perimeter from behind the west parapet, blood already soaking the shoulder of his suit. Antonio worked the ground floor from window to window, dropping shooters as they broke from the tree line. But Victor had brought everything he had. 70 guns. Every man of his crew was on the estate grounds tonight. 6 Moretti guards went down in the first half hour, then 7, then 8. Bruno took a round through the meat of his left shoulder and did not step off the line. He shifted the rifle to his right hand and kept giving orders into the radio between clenched teeth. Antonio dropped 5 men in the front hall before a round tore through his thigh. He dragged himself back into the small sitting room and kept firing from behind an overturned reading table. Alessandro and Lorenzo moved through the ground floor room by room, closing every angle that led toward the west staircase. The staircase led down to the wine cellar. The wine cellar held Sophia. At 4:15 in the morning, a group of 4 of Victor's men found what no one on the Moretti roster had thought about in years. There was an old service door on the west side of the basement wall. It had once opened onto a small strawberry garden that Alessandro's mother had kept before the war. The garden had gone to weeds 20 years ago. The door had been forgotten. The lock on it was old and cheap and had not been changed in half a century. 4 men came through it in less than a minute. Rosa heard the boots on the stone corridor first. She was standing in the wine cellar with Owen and Sophia. She grabbed Sophia by both shoulders and pushed her, hard, into the narrow gap between 2 of the tallest wine racks. Then she and Owen stepped in front of the gap. The cellar door banged open. 4 men in dark clothing stepped in, guns raised. Owen lifted the old double-barrel shotgun Alessandro had put into his hands 40 minutes ago in the study. Alessandro had shown him how to break it, load it, close it, and pull the triggers, in exactly 3 rushed minutes. Owen had never fired a gun in his life. The first shot took the lead man in the chest at 4 paces. The recoil almost knocked Owen off his feet. The second man returned fire. A round punched through the meat of Rosa's calf and she went down onto the flagstones with a sound Sophia would remember for the rest of her life. Owen worked the second trigger. The second man dropped. But the third man had already closed the distance, and his pistol was leveled straight at the gap between the wine racks, straight at Sophia. At that exact instant, Lorenzo crossed the threshold of the wine cellar. He had heard the first shot from the corridor above and had run straight for it. He came through the door, and in one fractional glance, he took in the geometry of the room. The man, the angle, Sophia between the racks, the pistol coming up. He did not think. He did not calculate. He drove himself forward with his whole body and shielded the child with the whole of his chest. The round entered him just below the collarbone and went into his heart. Alessandro was 2 steps behind him and saw only the back of his son suddenly stiffen and then fall. The 4th man was raising his weapon. Alessandro fired twice, fast and clean. The 3rd man collapsed onto the flagstones. The 4th followed him half a second later. The wine cellar went quiet except for Rosa's ragged breathing and the soft dripping sound Sophia was making. which was not tears yet but the sound just before tears. Alessandro fell to his knees beside his son. Blood was already spreading fast on the pale stone floor. He lifted Lorenzo's head onto his knee. Lorenzo was still breathing. Only just. His eyes were losing focus, but they were still open. "Father," he said. His voice broke on the word. "Father, protect Sophia. Do not let her grow up in this world." Alessandro gripped his son's hand. Tears fell onto the front of Lorenzo's shirt and mixed with the blood. "Speak, son. I am listening." Lorenzo swallowed. He fought to make each word. "The crew in Philly. I give it to you. Dissolve it. In peace. Nico, look after the men." He drew a breath that rattled. "Father, never again. Put power above family. Never again." Sophia crawled across the flagstones on her hands and knees. She threw both arms around her uncle's chest, careful of the wound, and pressed her forehead against his. "Uncle Lorenzo, please do not go. I still want to eat cannoli with you. You promised." Lorenzo tried to smile. His mouth moved. Almost. He lifted her small hand and set it flat on the front of his shirt, over his heart. His eyes turned once more to his father. He whispered very softly, "Father, I forgive you. Tell Elena. Tell her I am sorry I left the family." His breath went out. It did not come back. Sophia held on. She did not let go. She pressed her cheek against her uncle's cheek and began to cry into the collar of his coat, calling out her mother's name into the dark of the cellar. "Mama, Mama, Mama." Alessandro bent down and kissed his son on the forehead. Inside the chest of the 62-year-old boss of the Moretti family, something died at that moment and did not come back. The hardest part, the coldest part, the part that had lived inside him for 40 years. It went out with Lorenzo. Grief turned into fire. Alessandro laid his son down onto the flagstones with the care of a man laying a child in a cradle. He folded Lorenzo's hands over the front of his chest and closed the collar of his coat. He bent and kissed him once more on the forehead. When he stood up, he picked up the pistol Lorenzo had dropped and slid the magazine back into place. The eyes above the pistol were not the eyes of a boss anymore. They were the eyes of a father who had lost everything, and who no longer had anything to lose. Owen lifted Rosa off the flagstones. He half-carried, half-walked her and Sophia to a deeper corner of the cellar, behind a heavy oak table, where the sightlines from any door were broken by racks and columns. He set them both down. Then he picked up the shotgun, cracked the breech, thumbed in 2 fresh shells from his pocket, and turned to follow Alessandro, the 62-year-old boss of the Moretti family and the 34-year-old cemetery groundskeeper, 2 men who a month ago had not known each other's names. They climbed the west stairs side by side. On the way up, Alessandro keyed the radio at his shoulder. "Nico, you have overall command. No prisoners tonight. I want Victor and Marco alive. For me." Nico's voice came back over the crackle of gunfire. "Understood, sir." Alessandro led Owen and 3 of the surviving loyal guards through the ground floor. The battle went on. Windows had gone from panes to jagged frames. The rugs were dark in patches. Smoke drifted through the drapes. It ran until nearly 5:30 in the morning. The first pale color of dawn began to rise beyond the tree line to the east, above a rose garden littered with the bodies of men who had come there in the dark. Victor's men were being pushed back. Nico and the Philadelphia crew closed the ring from the east through the ornamental hedges. Bruno, one arm hanging useless from a shattered shoulder, closed it from the north with the last handful of estate guards still on their feet. Alessandro found Victor De Luca himself trying to flee through the far end of the rose garden. 2 bodyguards ran on either side of him, low, weapons up. Alessandro stepped out from behind the sundial. He raised the pistol. He fired once. The first bodyguard dropped mid-stride. He fired again. The second bodyguard dropped. Victor spun on his heel, brought his own weapon up, and pointed it at Alessandro's chest. Alessandro did not move to the side. He did not crouch. He stood in the gravel path between the roses and shot Victor De Luca once, precisely, between the eyes. The enemy of the Moretti family for 20 years dropped face down into the bed of red roses Elena had loved as a girl. Marco Bellini was found by Bruno inside the small glass house at the northwest corner of the property, the place where Rosa still grew basil and rosemary for the kitchen. Marco was crouched behind a potting bench with his pistol in his hand. He did not resist when Bruno pushed the muzzle of the rifle into the base of his neck. Bruno marched him at gunpoint across the wet lawn to where Alessandro was standing at the edge of the rose garden with the sun beginning to touch the tops of the maples. Marco went down onto his knees on the gravel. He was not afraid. He looked up at Alessandro and gave the same thin smile Sophia had seen through the gap in the door. 20 years I served you, Alessandro. 20 years. You never once gave me what I deserved. I was smarter than you. I worked harder than you. I understood the money better than you. I should have been the boss of this family. You only inherited a name." Alessandro looked down at him with an expression that had gone past anger. It was simply tired. He asked one question. "Elena, my daughter, was it you?" Marco laughed. It was the coldest sound the rose garden had ever heard. "It was not Lorenzo who killed Elena. It was me. She was going to bring my ledgers to you. She had almost found the Cayman accounts. I could not let her sit down with her father with those numbers in her hand. Frank Delgado was my mechanic. Lorenzo was only the perfect fall guy I had been building for 4 years, while he thought he was free in Philadelphia." Alessandro listened without moving. Every word landed inside him like a small nail driven into a wall that had already been broken. For 10 years he had blamed a rain shower on a coastal road. Now he knew. The man who had taken Elena from him had been the man who had stood at his right hand every single day for 20 years. He raised the pistol. He set the muzzle between Marco's eyes. His finger tightened on the trigger. He held it there. Then, slowly, he lowered the weapon. "No, you will live. You will spend the rest of your life in a federal cell. And you will know, every single morning when you open your eyes, that everything you built was for nothing. I will not give you the mercy of a fast death." He handed Marco to Bruno and gave one final order. "To the police, every account, every ledger, every wire, all of it." The sun climbed over the rose garden at last. Alessandro walked back through the ruined house to the wine cellar. He knelt on the flagstones next to Lorenzo and gathered Sophia into his shaking arms. She whispered against his shoulder, "Grandpa, Uncle Lorenzo went to see Mama Elena, didn't he?" Alessandro could not answer. He only held her closer. 3 months passed. Alessandro Moretti did what no boss of the 5 families of New York had ever done. He walked out of the underworld entirely. Every illegal arm of the Moretti operation, the last remaining underground rooms in Atlantic City, the shipping lanes out of the Newark port, the shadow ledgers that had bought 40 years of quiet power, he turned over to a small council of the men who had stood on the estate lawn that night and had not run. He gave them one condition. Every operation would be converted to legitimate business within 5 years. Bruno, his shoulder now healed to a stiff scar, took the seat at the head of the council. The Philadelphia crew, in keeping with Lorenzo's last words, was dissolved in peace. Nico was given a settlement large enough to buy the 2 nightclubs outright as clean businesses under his own name. Of the 40 men, half chose to walk away into ordinary lives. Alessandro funded every one of them. Some took security work. Some opened restaurants in South Philadelphia with money that carried no debt attached to it. The rest were folded into the new Moretti Group, a shipping and real estate holding company. Every legitimate asset of the family was consolidated into a single foundation, the Elena and Lorenzo Moretti Foundation. It funded 3 things: art education for children in Brooklyn, where Elena had once sat next to a young carpenter in a drawing class, college scholarships for the children of single-parent households, of the kind Owen had never had any help with, and free legal support for families targeted by organized crime, so that no other child would ever have to grow up hidden inside a fear the world could not see. Alessandro paid off every dollar of Gabriel Wood's remaining medical debt under the foundation's name and set aside a separate endowment large enough to send Sophia to any art school in the country when the day came. Lorenzo was buried beside Elena at Greenwood, beneath the old maple. Alessandro chose the words on the headstone himself. A son who returned his own name to honor with his own blood, Lorenzo Moretti, 1988 to 2026, uncle of Sophia, son of Alessandro, brother of Elena. Owen refused the large stipend Alessandro offered. He took only enough to move himself and Sophia into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Park Slope, closer to Sophia's new school. He kept his 3 days a week at Greenwood. Sophia lived formally with Alessandro, but every weekend she went home to Owen's apartment, ordinary as any other child's. Sometimes Alessandro and Owen argued about how to raise her. Alessandro wanted the best private school in the city. Owen wanted her to know how ordinary children lived. They settled it the way people who love the same child always settle it. Private school in the week, Owen's kitchen table on the weekends. Rosa, walking again with only a slight limp, became the second grandmother Sophia had never had. She taught the child to make pasta by hand, and biscotti from a recipe the estate had guarded for 40 years, and to say prayers in Italian on Sunday mornings. A year later, October returned, the anniversary of Elena's death, and now of Lorenzo's as well. This year, the ash tree at Greenwood did not stand over a single man with a single red rose. 4 figures stood beneath the maple: Alessandro, Owen, Sophia, Rosa, Between two graves, side by side, each of them laid one thing. Alessandro laid one red rose on Elena. He laid a second red rose, the first he had ever brought his son, on Lorenzo. Owen laid down the last photograph he had kept of Gabriel and Elena laughing outside the Red Hook shop. Rosa laid a small silk handkerchief she had kept in her wardrobe for 32 years, one that Elena had used as a child, and Sophia laid a drawing she had worked on for 2 weeks, 4 figures beneath the maple, and above them a sky full of stars, and in the stars 2 smiling faces looking down. Her mother, her uncle, she whispered to the 2 stones. "Mama, Uncle Lorenzo, I am very happy. I have Grandpa, I have Uncle Owen, I have Nonna Rosa, all of us are here with you." Afterward, Alessandro drove them all up the Hudson to a small valley where, beside a clear creek among red maples, stood a simple wooden house with a wide porch and a small footbridge over the water. Sophia opened her backpack and drew out the sketch Elena had drawn during her pregnancy, the one Alessandro had given her a year ago. She looked at the drawing. She looked at the house. She looked at the drawing again. "Grandpa, it is exactly the same as Mama's picture." Alessandro knelt beside her. "Because I built it from her picture, Sophia. I could not bring your mama back. I could not bring your uncle back. But I could build you the dream your mother wrote, so that you could grow up inside her drawing." Sophia only held on to him, and to Owen beside him. The house had a small woodworking shop for Owen behind the kitchen. Sophia had a bright studio filled with light. There was a long oak dining table with room for everyone. That first night they cooked together. Alessandro, 62 years old, the man who had once given orders that ended men's lives, stood at the stove and burned a pot of spaghetti for the 3rd time. Rosa laughed and pushed him out of the kitchen. Sophia and Owen laughed with her. Later, after Sophia had gone to sleep, Alessandro sat on the porch alone under the stars. He held Elena's letter in his hand, the paper more worn than a year ago. He whispered into the dark, "Thank you, Elena, for giving me a second chance. Thank you, Lorenzo, for forgiving me before you went. I will not fail either of you again." Sometimes the largest empires we build are the prisons that hold our own hearts. It is never too late to change. It is never too late to love. It is never too late to come home to your family and to your own heart. A family is not defined by being unbroken. It is defined by the willingness to keep loving after it has been broken. Does this story remind you of someone in your life? Is there someone you need to give a second chance to? Please leave a comment and share your story with us. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. We will see you in the next story, where every wound can become the beginning of something more beautiful.